right, and we're live. My name is Scott Cohen. I'm with the Founder Underground, and I am really excited to chat with Seth Banks, managing partner of the TrueSeed Group, to talk
Hello.
about B2B sales for founders, and specifically first-time founders. That's definitely one of the groups of people we love to work with. I myself, a little bit of background, I'm a four-time founder now, actually. And one of those ventures was a failure. I'd like to just admit that because this is why I'm so passionate about B2B sales now all of a sudden, or at least training founders. And Seth's
Yeah.
the expert on the sales side, because if we had known better and figured out how to actually do sales, the process of sales, instead of me just trying to be a good presenter, I think we would have had more success. And you don't want to sit where I'm sitting and have that and several $100,000 lost in investment. So we are doing this LinkedIn Live as a way to gear up for the 2-day B2B Sales Academy that's happening next week, Thursday and Friday, where 10 to 3, we're going to do an intense kind of training for founders on how to do sales, how to actually do the process of sales. And today we're going to talk about kind of what are the high points that we're going to dive into during the academy and why founders struggle so much with sales and how we can help them fix it. So before we get into that, Seth, why don't you give us a quick background about you? I know a lot of people who tune in will already know you because you are everywhere.
Hopefully.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about you and how you got into sales.
Yeah, no worries. Well, nice to meet everyone here. If you don't know me, my name is Seth Banks. I'm the managing director of TrueSeed, which is a sales enablement firm focused on founder-led sales education. And I've been in the B2B sales tech game for about 10 years now. 10 years. So I can say proudly I'm a veteran now, old guy.
I think that counts.
Yeah, I think that counts as well. But honestly, I fell into sales. It doesn't surprise me just because every single parent and grandparent that I have, they're all entrepreneurs. So I guess it was supposed to happen at some point in time.
Sure.
But actually started off recruiting for about a year and a half. And then from there, I jumped into tech sales as an SDR and climbed the ladder. Over the last 8 years has actually been a couple of positions: sales development representative, account executive, and then sales director, fractional sales director, to now managing director. So it's been fun. A lot of bumps and bruises. I think somewhere around north of 17 million that I've closed in revenue.
Nice.
So I've got some stories.
I bet.
And now it's all about helping founders, avoid some of those painful times.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're gonna, it's great to have someone who's actually gone through every role in the ladder, right? Because each one of them in a fully fleshed out company has a different role, but as a founder, you have to do all those roles essentially. And so,
Yeah.
What gets me so passionate about this and helping founders is that a lot of us kind of get sucked into the world of VCs and the world of like trying to be venture scale. And so you focus so much on pitching and your pitch deck and raising money, and you forget that fundamentally your business still runs on revenue.
Yep.
And you need to generate revenue. If you're in a B2B space, then sales is the name of the game. And it is not easy in today's world. We have so many distractions between social media, all the different tools that are out there, AI now. And so it's really, really hard to stand out. And that's going to be a part of what we talk about today. So let's get into it. I did a little bit of research. If you search B2B sales stats on Google, you'll get a gazillion, of just like marketing vomit. But some of these really hit home and I think are important because they're kind of the high points of what we're going to focus on at the academy and training founders how to do so they can actually start making repeatable sales and grow their business, as opposed to focusing on just solely on raising money. So the first one I wanted to throw out to you, Seth, is really around how the buyer themselves, how your prospective customer shows up in that initial conversation. So there's a couple of stats I want to share. The first is from a source called 6 Sense, and it says that 85% of buyers have largely established their purchase requirements, so what they're expecting out of the tool they're trying to buy, before they've even contacted a vendor like our founders. So I'll say that one more time. 85%, the vast majority of buyers have largely established their purchase requirements, so what they think is necessary to have in a tool, before they even talk to a vendor like our founders. And in addition to that, another stat is that buyers, and this kind of goes against that previous one, but this is why the process is so important. Buyers actually change their problem statement. So they change how they see the problem around 3 times during the complex purchasing process. And so what that means is if I'm a buyer, I'm out here trying to buy a SaaS solution, let's just say, for my company. Maybe it's to streamline my accounting or to streamline whatever. What often happens is I have an idea about why I need this platform, why I need this tool. And then through the sales process, I'm getting educated by different salespeople. Usually the better ones are educating me more. And I actually change how I think about this whole thing 3 times through that process.
Yep.
Even though I come in thinking I knew everything. So with that, I want to talk about how important it is to realize that buyers think that they know what they need.
Yeah.
And that as a founder is really your first big obstacle when you first get into contact with them. Seth, how do we teach founders to reframe a buyer's assumptions, without creating friction, let's say, but sometimes you need a little bit of positive tension?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think that statistic is actually correct. Most buyers are walking into the room with those assumptions about their own assumptions. And actually, I would say they know what their budget is most times, what their timelines are, what the product does. And our role to help founders is to help them understand that you have to lead these conversations with curiosity and not correction, right? You don't want to walk into that conversation trying to correct them around how they are already positioned and what they believe is basically the best way to approach this evaluation process, right? So you want to validate the assumption, and that's what we help founders understand is how do you help them validate those things and then guide it? How do you guide that throughout the sales cycle, throughout the relationship building process, right? For instance, if there is a buyer who says that they're going to take 6 months to evaluate, it's not up to us to say, hey, it shouldn't take that long, right? But we have to guide that and then also validate it. Hey, yeah, actually, for example, Ian, I definitely understand. That's actually what we've seen by working with a few other of our clients. And what we've seen, though, especially in our industry, is that when this specific process in place, we have been able to turn on our solution in half the time. The way that we've been able to do that is by XYZ. So I'm glad to be able to show you how we can speed up the time to the actual solution and helping you all change X in your current of how you're working. Something like that, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's a way to be able to help them understand that, okay, yeah, we hear you. And then also, here's a different way to think about it. Or here's a way, this is what we've seen. And so it's basically just this ping pong going back and forth while building the relationship, for sure.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's really important to understand that as a doing sales, as a founder doing sales, I'm not going to call our founders salespeople because I know that's not how they identify.
Right.
It's not how I identify. We'll get into that. But there's nothing more powerful than a question, right?
Yes.
A lot of times our assumption is that we go into a sales conversation and we need to convince the person to buy us. Obviously, that is the ultimate goal, but that is not the same as the process. And questioning, they're just probing the situation, what's led them there, what they're trying to fix, what their goals are, probing them with intelligent questions. And then, like you said, sharing relevant information about what you know about the space, because you oftentimes know more about the market and the competition than they do because they're focused on their lane, right?
Right. Yep.
So you bring that knowledge, and by asking questions, you help them sort of arrive at a similar conclusion to you.
1,000%.
If you don't, right, as you were saying, if they come in, and this is one of my future stats here, but I'm going to mention it now too, is if you come in, they come in oftentimes believing like they know what they're trying to do and they know what they need, right? And so they've already decided what the perfect tool looks like. And that's basically they're grading your product on their private rubric, whereas you built your product on your own rubric.
Right.
Because you understand the problem in your own way. And so what you need to do is try to get them to shift their perspective to see it's like, hey, actually the things that you're judging a potential solution on are actually maybe not the best things for you right now.
Yep.
And these are those things.
Yep.
And questioning is the way you can do that with empathy, with curiosity, and without being, a pushy asshole salesperson. Excuse my language, LinkedIn. I don't know how they censor this stuff. So yeah, I love that. First point is you really have to understand where they're coming from and help them reframe their perspective and their assumptions through these questions.
Yeah, help them feel safe while you're updating their thinking, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
So the second thing that founders struggle with in sales tons of times, and I alluded to this just now, is they don't want to be a salesperson,
Right.
right? Sorry, Seth, we don't want to be you. We don't want to be the salesperson. I mean, you're a founder now too, but as a founder, you get into starting a company and being a founder because you want to be a founder. You don't want to
Right.
be a salesperson. If I wanted to
Right.
get into sales, I would have gone into sales.
Yeah.
And so, one of the challenges that a lot of times our founders, especially first time founders,
Mm-hmm.
they view sales as a persona, right?
Mm.
It's an identity that they have to take on in order to be successful. And that is just not the case. Sales is not a persona, it's not an identity. It is a repeatable, intentional process when you're doing it right. And so, I want to share a stat. Only 13% of sellers, that's our founders in this case, take a problem-minded approach to discovery.
Mm.
And so what does that really mean? It means that founders, again, especially our first-time folks, which we all were one time, first-time founders often mistake selling for pitching,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they skip the steps
Mm-hmm.
in between the process. And
Yep.
so, Seth, I want to put it to you. Why do so many founders confuse pitching with selling, and how do we help them reframe that?
Well, it's because those founders are used to selling the vision and not the solution, right? So they've been pitching to VCs, they've been demoing at pitch competitions, they've refined, the whole origin story. So when it's time to sell, you're going to default to that broadcast mode, the mode of you pitching. That's okay. We just have to understand that we are not pitching to VCs, we're selling to clients, and it's a completely different landscape, right? It's a completely different strategy and also energy there, right? So, we help founders reframe by shifting their role, right? So you're not the main character. You are when you're pitching, but when you're selling, the buyer's actually the main character. So you gotta realize that selling is really about asking, it's about listening, it's about diagnosing, and it's also about guiding,
Yeah.
right? So when you start to pitch in your mind, you are subconsciously thinking, how do I come off as impressive as possible?
Mm-hmm.
And selling is all about how can I be the most effective as possible,
Yeah. Right.
right? And
Yeah.
so when founders see that, then they'll start to realize that the great sellers are the ones who are talking less and listening more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the best sales conversations that you can have.
Right. Yeah. No, I love the way you put that. It's so true, right? When you start a venture, especially in tech, it's a lot of the tech communities, startup communities are run by accelerators or by venture capital,
Yep.
and they can provide a lot of mentorship, a lot of great guidance, but they are, they have their own goals and incentives too, right? And
Mm-hmm.
fundraising and growing is a big part of that. But when you're talking to a customer, they're very different. Their priority is solving whatever problem they have. And so
Right.
to your point, when you're pitching, that's a presentation, right? Like you are
Mm-hmm.
the center of the universe and you're trying to convince people that you're the one to show them to the promised land, so to speak. But that's not
Yeah.
what a customer is there for. A customer is
Correct.
there for you to help them get to their promised land. They probably don't even want to remember your name. They want to get the product, they want to use it without you, and they don't want to talk to you again because they know you're going to sell them some more stuff.
Right.
And that's why it's so important to realize that pitching is all about telling, right?
Mm-hmm.
But selling is really about uncovering. It's
Mm-hmm.
about uncovering the pains, uncovering the obstacles in the way of success for that buyer. And that's really what we're trying to do as part of the academy is replace this idea of you need to go in and pitch and really be on the top of your game, be inspiring, share your whole founding story. And instead it's like, hey, you can actually have a structured process that's repeatable, that comes with questions. So you go into every conversation, being able to be authentic and organic, but also structured. So you make sure to get through the information you need to get through, because a lot of times you got to make sure they're the right people for you too. And so that's one of the big things we focus on in this upcoming academy too, is giving people that simple structure that they can do over and over. So it's not always like, I need to convince everybody that the reason we're building this is for some grand vision.
Yeah.
The reason you're building is to help this customer out. That's
Right.
the point.
Right.
Now I want to caveat. One thing is, especially early on, if you come from the same background as your customer, is there room to share your backstory about how you kind of got going? Like, hey, if I was so I'll give you an example. When I was running my ed tech company, I used to be a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
and sharing the fact that I was a teacher and that these were some challenges that I experienced personally, that usually builds some credibility for me in those sales conversations. In fact, I had some principals of schools who were like, yeah, we actually don't buy from people who were not former educators.
Oh, wow.
Now, that might be a very K-12 education, and rightfully so, but I'm just curious, is there any room for sharing a little bit of that backstory if it's aligned with the customers?
1000%. That's building relatability, right? So I rather buy something from a friend who is selling me on, the solution if they've already solved it themselves, or if they come from a world where they are sharing the same type of symptoms or issues or challenges that I am currently experiencing. And that's the same that buyers and sellers have to think about. The buyer psychology is, I want to talk to someone who really understands me. And so if you come from that same world, then 1000%, that's a point of connection, right? It's not just B2B, it's actually P2P, it's person to person. It's not just business to business. And so that's a person to person connection. Yeah, I actually share that because I've worked in the X industry for 7 years, 8 years, 13 years. That's exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing today. This is why we've been able to have the success that we have today, is because we relate to that buyer persona, right? Or that champion. And that makes them feel like, oh, I'm talking to the right people. You should definitely be sharing your experience if you come from that world. And if you have a sales team, really it's about making sure that whoever's duplicating those conversations can understand your story, the vision of the company, and then build that into the conversation and relationship building process with whoever that is. But for founders, they have a unique advantage and differentiator to leverage their own experience when selling a product.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's an important subtle distinction here between telling them your story from the outset, which is what pitching really is,
Yep.
and relating your story after uncovering their story.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a really important distinction here, is it still needs to center around the person you're talking to. What is their story? What are their pains and all that jazz? And then if you have points to relate, definitely do that, right? You want to build rapport. You want to make sure they understand that you understand where they're coming from. So yeah, super important. Let's move on to number 3. So this one is wild, and I don't think founders know this.
Okay.
By the time buyers talk to you, they've largely already made up their minds in terms of a short list, or at least they think they have. So there's a stat here that says 90% of deals go to vendors that were already on the buyer's initial short list. And buyers today usually have a short list of about 3 vendors. Now, this is like a crazy stat. So what does that tell us? That tells us that if you're not already in that short list, it's going to be very hard to break through, right? And so how do you translate that for a founder, and how does that translate into practical tips that they should be thinking about, knowing that the buyers themselves are already doing so much research on their own that if you're not on that short list, like, what are you supposed to be doing?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I think a lot of us in early stage startups, we're not really understanding that 5% of our market is actually ready to buy, and 95% of our market, we're warming them up to buy. Right. And so there are going to be very seldom few opportunities that we come across where, every single time we speak with someone who is warming up, if you will, it is going to be in the position to buy at that moment. Right. And so if you are on that list of, hey, my job is to make sure that I look at these 3 solutions, these 5 vendors, and pick the best one. Somebody is.
You're over at Talladega.
If someone is looking at 5 different vendors, then you want to make sure, and they have a favorite, right? You want to win by challenging the buyer's perspective. You're not going to be able to challenge their decision, and they might already have that made up, and you might even feel that they have a decision that they've already made, but you don't win by playing the comparison game, and that's where a lot of us actually get caught up. You actually win by showing the buyer something that they haven't thought about yet.
Right. Yeah.
right? And so you've got to get really good at asking better questions. And this is definitely a skill that takes time. But as soon as you start to help them uncover gaps in their favorite, then you're going to start educating them without them being defensive. Just giving them different things to think about, right? Because buyers don't change vendors because because you're louder. They change because you help them see something new. You help
Right.
them understand that, hey, maybe there's a better way to look at how I'm trying to solve this problem. So we should really just be aiming at being the most insightful person in the room and not the most persuasive, and also giving kudos to the competition wherever they may shine.
Yeah.
One of the worst things that you can do is by downplaying another solution, because it just looks tacky. It doesn't look good at all, right?
It looks a little naive too, a lot of times.
It does. It also centers you back in the middle of the room, right? Like, hey, like, we're the best, I'm the best. Like,
Yeah.
you're stupid for making that type of decision if you go with them.
Right. Right.
So there's a way that you can go about that so that that feeling isn't the automatic response to that
Yeah.
type of strategy.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's so important because a lot of times, look, if you're a founder, you've got your new product, there's absolutely no way it can go toe to toe with incumbents in terms of feature set,
Right.
right? Like they've got so many more features because they've been around for longer. Sometimes they've been around for decades.
Yep.
And so you don't want that game. You want to change the game you're playing,
Mm,
right? You want to change the criteria of success. And it centers around the reason you probably started the company in the first place and that problems that were existing with the current solutions. But to your point, it's about if you're in the room and you know that they're already looking at incumbent players or other players, then you have to figure out, okay, what are the underlying assumptions and how can I just gently challenge those and say, look, okay, you might want this, but in our experience, this is what we've seen.
mm.
This is something that customers value maybe a little bit more. The other thing I think we should call out is, okay, we just talked about if you get in the room and you're not on their short list, and that becomes obvious, which a lot of times it does. But what about actually getting into their short list before you even talk to them, right? This is
Mm.
why those first impressions actually come before the call,
Yes.
right? And it comes through, and I know a lot of founders, again, they didn't sign up to be marketers either, but it comes through content, it comes through positioning,
Yes.
presence. So everything from your website. So I think it's like something crazy, like 97% of people check out your website before they talk to you. That should be
Yes.
no surprise.
Yep.
It might be higher. I want to meet the 3% who aren't looking at
Right.
the website. But so you have to be present in the sphere of influence that you're playing in, and a lot of founders struggle with this. Like, how do you find time to make regular social media posts? Like, what do you write about? How do you create content? Is it, where do you put it? So I'm curious, like, how do you start that conversation with a founder when it
Yeah.
comes to, like, all right, making a presence for yourself and your product?
Yeah, well, again, you're warming up 95% of the market, and the only way you're going to be able to warm them up is through content, building trust, and building brand awareness. And your biggest superpower at this point is your face card, right? So webinars, basically you channeling the opportunity to change the way that your market is thinking about a specific problem and how to change it is what you need to get really good at. And then creating a community where those conversations can start to take place and people can start to recognize that this is something that's different, this is innovative, that's taking place in our space, and these are the people and this is the company that's guiding that conversation, right? So it's really about those different ways that you can do that, and those can be short clips that you just break into maybe 4 or 5 different posts on LinkedIn, or 3 at least a week. Those are your own thoughts that you're sharing. Those are podcasts, even if it's just audio, right? Our main goal on our website is our first salesperson. I tell founders that all the time. Your website is your first salesperson. That is where the conversion to meetings should be happening. Any other type of outreach should just be warming them up and driving them to your website, or driving them to other places where they can learn and get to know you and like
Right.
you, so that by the time they get to your website, they are already that much closer to booking time with you and wanting to have that conversation.
Yeah, no, it's such an important point about the warming up too. I think, so much of today you throw stuff out, hope marketing, where you just kind of
Yeah,
blast stuff out across every channel you can think of and
right.
hope someone finds it. But
Yep.
to your point, like most of the time it takes 5, 6, 7 touch points before even getting them really like interested
Yeah.
because
And that's not 5 or 6 or 7 different emails. It's just touch points, them
right.
just experiencing your brand or you.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
this is so tough for founders to wrap their heads around because we all start with the belief that's like, well, once they just see my product, that it exists, they're going to
Yeah.
buy it, right?
That's not
And
true.
I've been there. It isn't true, unfortunately. Think about yourself. I always think about
Yeah.
myself as a consumer, right?
Right.
I don't make decisions off of seeing something for the first time. I typically want to hear somebody else refer it to me, or I want to see it multiple times and do some research, and I'll come back to it later and maybe make the purchase. You have to, I would say, go about this with assuming the bar is a lot higher than you initially assume.
Yeah.
And if you're having trouble coming up with content, to your point, one of the things I love to tell founders is, well, start with what you talk about with your co-founder or what you
Mm.
talk about with people you're telling about your venture and why it's so needed. There's a
Yep.
lot of stuff in there. It's like, oh, well, the industry sucks because of this reason and this reason, or this platform really sucks. Write those down,
Right.
expand upon them, and turn that into your positioning, right? Your perspective. Put them up as a short blog post, put them up on a LinkedIn post, and
Mm-hmm.
make sure it all gets on your website, to your point, to kind of capture your point of view. And you don't have to come up with some really sophisticated strategy. In fact, I would argue you need to do the opposite. You need to pick one channel
Mm-hmm.
where you know that your potential customers are and just start fleshing out your message.
Yep.
You're
And
going
be
to,
consistent.
yeah, yeah. You consistent in both message and in posting, right?
Yes.
Because the algorithms work that way. On LinkedIn, which I know most of us use for B2B sales stuff, and we're live on LinkedIn right now. You have to, not only do you have to post consistently to be elevated by the algorithm, you also have to interact with other posts.
Mm.
Right. And so if you're not commenting on another person's post or anything like that, you still don't get that kind of exposure. And so as much as it sucks, you do have to be consistent. But now there's so many tools out there where it can help you kind of automate, schedule posts. Obviously, Gen AI can help you really flesh out your ideas and come up with a lot of different posts. Just make sure
Yeah.
you delete some of those emojis that we're all used to seeing now because,
Yep.
this Gen AI generated. So, okay.
Uh-huh.
So we've covered a couple of things already. And again, this is Ian Scott Cohen with the Founder Underground. Seth Banks here, managing partner of TrueSeed Group, specializing in startup B2B sales. And we are gearing up for the B2B Sales Academy next week. It is 2 days focused on founders, especially first-time founders, who have never or are trying to, I should say, get their sales off the ground. We are going to teach you how to actually do this process. And
Yes.
it is not just being really persuasive and pushy. It is in fact the opposite of that. There's a whole process involved. And so today what we've been doing is just talking about a few of the reasons the founders struggle. One was that the buyers come in and they think they know what they need. And so you have to learn how to reframe their assumptions. Another one is that a lot of founders struggle with not wanting to be a salesperson, but in reality, it's not about being a certain identity. It's about coming in and just being curious and doing discovery work, which is why we call that first call the discovery call, because you're trying to uncover what the problem is for your buyers. And then we just talked about how a lot of buyers come in and they already kind of have their minds made up about what they value and about the top choices they have. And so if you're not in that top list, you again have to kind of reframe them and show them why they might be underinformed, let's say. So the last two I wanted to mention today was, and this one's near and dear to my heart here, is this idea that nobody's really teaching founders how to sell.
Mm.
And that is why we built this. I've been through some of the top accelerators in the country. I've been on the program side too, leading programs. And I know for a fact that sales is not taught in almost every program. That's not because the programs don't know sales are important. They do,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
Most of the time, it's a combination of, one, they don't have the capacity, right? If you've been in an accelerator, a lot of times it's like a 2 to 3 person team. They've got a couple of core things they do, but they don't really have trainers on board to specialize in this stuff. And the second part is that a lot of these programs are driven by investors. Accelerators are investors too, FYI, for most of our folks out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have their own goals, right? They want you to raise money so your valuation can grow, so your company can theoretically grow. But in order to qualify to raise money, you need to make money. You need to generate revenue. And so that's really why we built this. And I wanted to get your perspective on why founder sales is such a blind spot in this startup world and what do you see most founders relying on right now before they come to you and get into it? What are they usually doing when you first meet them?
Man, they're just guessing. Honestly, there's a little bit of imposter syndrome that's taking place there as well, where I think that as founders stepping into that leadership role, they automatically put the burden on themselves to be great at sales, because
Right.
that's
Yeah,
how the
definitely.
rest of the world, they believe, looks at them as CEOs, right? Like,
Yep.
as a
Yep.
founder, if this is your vision, you should be able to sell it. And so there's a skip of education, and it just hops straight into, well, let me try to personify this great salesperson,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And I fell into that same feeling that you fell into, a completely different way, right? For me, after selling enterprise and just wanting to switch and make a pivot in my career to more of a leadership role, more of a consulting role, after being a fractional sales director, what I started to see is that the founders that were tapping on my shoulder to help with sales, I mean, the reason, yes, they were trying to get help with sales, but really what they were trying to do was just avoid having to sell.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
hey, I'm trying to learn how to do this the right way. It's, can I go get someone that can do this for me?
Hmm.
Because I understand that this is probably something that's bigger than I thought that I would have to tackle and understand. And I'm not having a lot of success with it. So then the first thing that your mind says to yourself is, we should hire somebody.
Right.
Right. And so the reason why it's such a blind spot, I think, in startup education is because startup education, and this is from my research and the reason why we even started TrueSeed, a lot of it is just focused on building the product, raising the round, designing the brand, but not yet really focused on driving revenue, because that's also a completely different degree in itself that you have to go and obtain, right? And it's also not sexy to teach like outbound sequences or how to lead a discovery call, but that's actually where your businesses like live or die.
Right.
So it's really important. And truthfully, a lot of accelerators and advisors don't even know how to teach it either, right? Because they've never sold.
Yeah.
So it's not even their fault. Sometimes they just don't have that type of experience to be able to say, hey, this is what you should do. And also, there's not a lot of people out there teaching sales in the startup world. Why? Because salespeople don't actually start their own businesses. Why? Because they always have a job.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
So if you're making $200, $300, $400,000 a year because you know how to sell someone else's product, why would you start the almost damn near impossible journey of scaling your own?
Right. Yeah.
So there's not a lot of resources out there around sales. It's a blind spot and a gap, empirical gap, actually, that we saw, you and I both, which is why we're here today and doing the work that we're doing. So, it's really easy for you to hear, hey, go validate, go see if you have product market fit.
Yeah.
But often, you're not getting the hand holding process, which is teaching them how to validate the product. And you do that through your sales methodology. You do that through your sales training. You
Hmm.
understand if you need to pivot or not with your product through your sales conversations. It's through the customer discovery, which doesn't happen unless it's in a sales conversation, right?
Hmm.
And so that's why, we are doing what we're doing to help fill that up, or fill that gap, excuse me, because that's just the biggest thing that's going to help you either become profitable. And it's the difference between being fundable and profitable. We know that most startups are receiving funding, but they're not succeeding. And it's because they never cracked the code before actually taking the money.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you had dropped so many nuggets in there that I want to try to unpack a couple. So first off, you're right to say that a lot of startup programs are led by folks who may have had success in a startup, which is
Hmm.
great, but they weren't usually the salespeople.
Right.
And so they don't know sales methodology, sales process. Plus, a little shout out to my educator friends. Most of these people don't know how to teach anything. Teaching and coaching are skills as well.
Yeah.
And I'll stand and die on that hill all day long because
Right.
I am an award-winning teacher and coach, and I know what it takes.
Hmm.
But I've sat through so many workshops and webinars by so and so who sold his company, or this person, she was the 20-time founder or whatever, and they're clearly accomplished, but that doesn't mean they know how to teach you anything.
Mm.
There's like I won't use a football reference, but it's famous among athletes. Like some of the top athletes of all time will be the first to tell you that's like they don't know how to coach anybody. Like they can't do it. It doesn't come naturally to them. Other people it
Right.
does. And so part of this is really combining these things, right? Like teaching the fundamentals and teaching them the way that actually works, aside from just a one-off workshop that, you might see in a startup program, but that isn't actually going to leave you with what you need. The other thing that I wanted to call out that you mentioned, now I'm kind of forgetting it, I guess, is there's this myth in the startup world that's been going around forever. It's founders need to be the best salespeople. And every time I hear it, I want to just hurt something, an inanimate object, nothing. But it's basically this idea. It's like, oh, well, you're the founder. You need to be able to go out and sell this. That's true to some extent, right? But that doesn't mean you're naturally good at it, right? Founders are great at being evangelists. Usually they can tell their story and their vision, but as we said before, sales is a process. And so they need to learn that skill set, and most people don't teach them that. So the last thing I want to touch on before we close this out is a couple things, I guess. But one of these stats is about how many people are involved in purchasing decisions. And another one is about marketing leads. So I'll start with the leads one. So there's a stat that only 25% of marketing leads are high enough quality to pass to sales. Okay, so this is really getting at qualifying your leads. And founders, I know from experience, we hate the idea of qualifying leads because we want to take any lead that we can get, right? But the idea, I guess, just give me a basic understanding of what is the idea behind qualifying and why is it so important, even if you're early stage?
Okay, yes, this is a very important topic. Well, the key to qualifying, and I think what resonates most with founders when we're talking about qualifying, is the protection of your time. That's the reason why it's important to qualify, because every single hour that you're spending chasing a deal that's not going to close, you're not spending an hour investing or building a relationship with the person who's holding the deal that is going to close. And so that hour is very precious. And I always like to think of myself as a founder's fractional sales director. I always put that hat on. And if I'm in that role, the last thing that I want my founder doing is spending time on deals that are not going to close. And you don't know that unless a deal is qualified. So you need to really unveil the urgency. You need to reveal their budget. You need to reveal the timing of the decision. You got to evaluate where they are in their process of evaluation. And sometimes you have to teach them how to buy. You have to teach them how to buy a solution and how to be ready. And that's the art of this, right? That's why the founders do need extra coaching in these sales conversations, because the way that you do that could make or break your deal.
Yeah.
Right. And so the whole key about qualifying is, am I talking to the buyers who are ready to buy? You don't need 10 deals a week. You need 3 deals a month that are ready to buy. Right. And then you're going to nurture the deals that are not ready to buy, but they came in contact with you. And that's why it's so important to leave a great first impression and meet them where they're at. Right. So if they're not ready to buy today or within the next quarter, what can you give them now as a resource that keeps them close to you, so that when they are ready, you're the first person that they think of. You're the first solution that they think of.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, if you're trying to think about ideas of what you can leave them with, some of the things is, well, you came up with your solution. How did you come up with it? You probably have some sort of idea about what an organization or a business looks like without the solution. So help them figure out if they look like that, right?
Yeah.
You can make a little assessment, a little checklist, like something where it's like, hey, you know what? I know you're not ready to make the decision yet. That's great. Well, you know how to reach me. Here's a quick little tool that we created to help businesses evaluate where they're at on X, Y, and Z. These are little things that you can do with knowledge you've already got. And I want to go a step further and say, the other big important reason to qualify buyers is, God forbid, you actually get the sale with an unqualified buyer, meaning, and that might seem like an oxymoron, but I'll explain. So if you are so persuasive that you get somebody who I'll just say maybe they're qualified in that they did make a purchase and they buy you, but they're not a good fit. Right? They're not your ideal customer, which gets into ideal customer profile, something we're going to talk all about at the Academy. I have had this experience where you actually land a customer and they turn into a nightmare, right? Because they're not using your product the way that it's meant to be used. And so they have constant complaints. They want different features than what you envisioned, which sometimes can be good, but not if they're not a good fit, not if they're not your customer profile. And it can end up getting you really discouraged, taking up tons of your time, producing bad reviews, giving you false positives or false negatives on features. It can wreck your team's morale. And I've seen this in a lot of settings before. So that's another reason why qualifying buyers is so important. And there are simple ways to do it. I know we're throwing a lot of different ideas out there, but this is what the Academy is for. In 2 days, we will absolutely cover and teach you how to simply qualify a buyer and know whether you should give them more time or not. And that is very easy to do. So the other thing was how many people are actually involved in purchasing decisions, and we'll finish on that.
Okay.
So according to Gartner, in companies with 100 to 500 employees, which I would say is, probably pretty average for what a lot of B2B sales folks are going for. They say that 6 to 7 people are involved in purchasing decisions for companies that size. Now, let's say even if it's just 3 or 4, right? Even if it's not 6 or 7, there's another stat that's from SBI that says the number one reason deals stall is lack of internal alignment on the problem or priority.
Yep.
And so I'd love for you just to share some thoughts about this. Like, when you're selling that first call to somebody, you're not really selling just to them, right? You're selling to the people behind them, above them, around them that they're either going to share this with, they're going to introduce you to. So how should a founder go into this thinking about the the sales process in this way that they have to actually convince a group of people to align around this? How do you start thinking about that as a founder?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the first mistake that I see most founders make, and just sellers in general, right? It's not just founders, it's the early stages of selling, right? It's falling in love with the champion, but ignoring that buying committee, right? Because we really believe that the enthusiasm in those conversations is equal to influence, and it's not, right?
Right. Yeah.
You have to map out the org and get an understanding of who those other stakeholders are and who else really needs to be involved, just so that you can understand the internal process, because you will drive yourself crazy if you have these really high energetic conversations and then you're wondering why your champion hasn't responded back to your email in 2.5 weeks. Because they are trying to deal with whatever internal gate or challenge roadblock that they're experiencing that they're not bringing you into, because in their mind, how are you going to help them navigate their internal workplace, right?
Yeah.
So you got to get sure of the organization, who the stakeholders are, map that out. A real deal has stakeholders, it has timelines, and it has traction, right? It's not just about these good vibes. And momentum in the deal really comes from that clarity and control over the process. And what's really tricky is, sometimes half of the founders that we work with, they actually know that they need to be bringing this other stakeholders, but it's the way that they do it that is a challenge. It's how do we get them on the call without this person, this gatekeeper in front of me feeling offended? Right? Or us, rattling the boat, if you will, and basically making the buyer or the champion feel like, hey, you're not the most important person to be talking to. So, hey, can you actually get me in touch with someone like your CFO? And that's not what this is about. This is about bringing everyone into the room together to evaluate this so that we can birth the conversation and allow for there to be a lot of different thoughts and synergy to be built around the solution at the same time. Because otherwise, what that champion is going to do, and again, you have to lead that champion and let them know what they're getting ready to come up against. If they don't bring those other stakeholders into the room, then it's going to be their job to try to remember everything that you're getting ready to show them and explain to them. And then it's going to be their job to try to do it to their boss. And that's not their job. That's your job.
Right.
That's your job as a founder, and you have to make sure that the champion understands that that is your job, and you're going to take that off of their plate so that you can actually do that well. And then the champion is rewarded for bringing such a great solution and a person, to the team that's helping them prioritize that solution in the evaluation process. So that really is, again, it's another skill that you have to learn how to do. Otherwise, you're just going to fall back into, all right, well, let me just hope that this champion is going to do what they say they're going to do, and that they're as important as they say that they are. And that hope is not a strategy to success. It's not a strategy to revenue. Yeah. Right. And so you've got to get really good at being able to do that and stay firm in that without feeling like you're ruffling the feathers or you're going to lose the deal.
Yeah. And, this is so important. And because you don't know the standing of that person in their organization.
You
You
don't.
don't know, they could have brought 1,000 products to their team and none of them were good.
Yeah.
It's like if you're ever in a fraternity or sorority or some sort of social club, like,
Yep.
you might bring a person in, but the whole group needs to approve them. And so if your champion doesn't actually have standing in the group, same thing happens with VCs. If the partner that brings you in does not have a good rep amongst their partners, it might not really matter if you're letting them do the pitching.
Yep.
And so the other part that you make that I think is so powerful is bringing more people into the conversation, right? It's not a checkbox where it's like, all right, I got this level, then this level, then this level, because that can, be foiled with one bad note, right?
Right.
One person can spoil the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing you have to think about is, let's say you're successful, you want investment across teams so that when they implement your tool or your solution, there's actually investment in making this work, right? There's nothing worse than having one team buy something that affects other teams, and those other teams just kind of mothballing it because they don't care. They don't want it. They didn't choose it, and they're not interested in it. There's a crazy stat in I don't know if it was specific to ed tech or not. I think it was, but it was like 65% of all SaaS licenses for purchases made by K-12 education systems, 65% of those licenses go unused every year.
Wow.
And it's because you're not building investment across the board. Teachers have already so many things to use, so they're like, I don't need another thing, and there's no accountability tied to it. Plus, if your tool is so if it doesn't have an outsized impact that a bunch of teachers can just choose not to use it at all and not see any difference in performance, you also have to ask yourself, are we delivering enough value here?
Right.
So all these things, again, if you're sitting there listening to this and you're thinking, wow, there's so many aspects of sales, how am I going to do this? Then yeah, you're in the right place.
Yep.
It is tough. It's hard, but that's what being a founder is. And there's nothing that you can do for your business that's more important than getting decent enough at sales. No one's saying you're going to be a master. No one's saying you're going to be the sales director for your entire company's history. This just needs to give you enough skills to get the ball rolling, find those initial customers, and get revenue going so that you can show that there's a business here. And then eventually we'll teach you how to hire folks, how to build that organization out. But
yeah, 1,000%.
Yeah, let's close it there because we've got so much more to share. So just so everybody's aware, next week, Thursday and Friday, April 24th to 25th. It's next week. That's crazy.
Next week.
We are doing a 2-day B2B Sales Academy for founders, especially first-time founders, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursday and 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday. In this event, we're going to give you templates to use for trying to establish some leads, for doing that first call with your leads to try to get through some real discovery. And we have a whole presentation template that'll help you realize most of what you've been doing is probably not that effective. And we're going to give you exactly what you should be doing. And there's work time built in. So we're going to help you actually apply the stuff in real time. So it's not one of those, you get 12 hours of content and then you spent scrambling trying to remember it all. We're going to actually do it as we go. So you'll walk away with a lot of this built, and then you'll have access to the recordings for another 2 weeks afterwards. You can reference them. You can obviously reach out to us. You are interested and you watched this and you made it to the end and you want a discount, feel free to DM me or Seth on LinkedIn or elsewhere, and we will send you a 15% off discount code. We have individual tickets and also team tickets if you're co-founders or you are the founder and you have somebody helping you with sales. You can both come to it. So definitely check it out. You can go to thefounderunderground.com for more information. You also go to either of our LinkedIn profiles. We've got a bunch of these links already posted up there.
Yep. And let me say this, Ian.
Yeah, please.
If you are a founder and you know that any part of what we are communicating to you is a challenge for you, and let's just say you invest into this type of education and you close one deal, right? We like to make things really simple. If you close one deal from anything that we teach, which we know that needs to be taught, and you know that you need to learn, then that was a great investment.
Absolutely.
That was a great investment. And the way that we like to help founders understand that they can do this is like, you guys are all-star basketball players or all-star athletes. We're just coaching you and teaching you how to use your skills the right way, right? So it's going to be really great for you to get into that type of environment. And Ian and I have worked our butts off to make sure that this is going to be a lot of value, that you guys are going to love it. So I just wanted to throw that out there. The
Yeah,
investment into your
great point.
education is really important. If you close one deal, this will be worth it. And we guarantee you that if you're serious about this, you're going to close more than one. We can promise that.
No, I love that. And if you're just doing email automation and LinkedIn messaging and you're not getting anywhere, this is for you, because that is not a sales process. That is
not.
hope sales stuff.
Yep.
We can help you actually form a process that works. And like you said, if you convert just one new deal, it'll cover the cost and then some. You know, you're probably doing 4 or 5 figure deals. So this will more than, 10 times as much as this investment is.
Yep.
So with that, we appreciate you for tuning in. Thank you so much, Seth, as always, managing partner of the TrueSeed Group. I'm Ian Scott Cohen from the Founder Underground, and we will hopefully see you all at the B2B Sales Academy next Thursday and Friday. Until then, keep building, and we'll talk to you soon.
Talk soon.